This is the Microcyb M4-Pi Pixel Controller, and today we're going to do a quick overview of how to get it going, get some lights dancing, and go over the board real quick. So the M4 is a 4-port pixel controller cape or hat for Raspberry Pis. Can drive 5 or 12 volt LEDs, most notably WS2811s, but most 3-wire type addressable LEDs should work just fine. The little M4 is great for adding on to a current show, but also if you do an off-season house outline or something in your backyard, it could be a nifty little solution to a problem. Even for mobile applications, with running a Raspberry Pi and FPP, it's fully standalone, so it's great for if you want to deck out your car, your truck, if you're running a float, maybe your campsite with your camper, or even ice houses. If you can think of anything else it would be good for, let me know down in the comments. So going over the M4 real quick, you get 4 fused outputs that can drive up to about 1600 lights per output at 20 FPS. But if you like to do 40 FPS, then you're kind of cutting that in half at about 800 pixels per port. To hit those numbers, you are going to have to do some power injection. But also, if you're using a Raspberry Pi Zero, you aren't going to be able to hit those numbers, probably about half. There is a power jumper on the M4 that will let you select between 5 or 12 volts. So you want to set that to the proper power that you're powering your pixels with. And the power adapter here will actually power the Pi. It'll travel through the board and power the Pi itself, so you don't have to worry about any auxiliary power powering your Pi. The other thing on the M4 is the OLED screen and little joystick here. The OLED lets you see things like your controller's IP address, the temperature of the Pi. You can go through sequences, test modes, you can start, reboot it, and it's super easy to get around with the little joystick cover that the M4 comes with. So to get up and running, you will need obviously the M4 itself, but then you also need a Raspberry Pi. The M4 is compatible with Pi 3s, 3Bs, 3B pluses, all Pi 4s. You can even use Pi Zeros, but you'll also have a dropped output count for the total outputs. You will also need a 8 to 32 gigabyte SD card, and you're going to need Falcon Player installed on that SD card, which we'll go over here in a few minutes. Other thing that you're going to need is a license for FPP 6.0. Currently, they don't have a 4-port license available, so the closest one is an 8-port. It's $10, and in a little bit, we'll go over showing you how to get that. So if all you wanted to see was a quick review of the Microcyb M4-Pi hat, appreciate you watching. But if you want to learn how to install FPP, get it into X-Lights, all that good stuff, that's what we're off to next. Installing Falcon Player is really simple. If you've ever burned an image to an SD card before, it's pretty much the same process that you've done before. Okay, so here we are in Google, and we just searched for Falcon Christmas GitHub, and our first result is Falcon Christmas FPP. You're going to want to click on that, and then over on the right here where it says releases, you're going to want to click on the 6.1. That was released 4 days ago. And then we're going to want to scroll to the bottom. You can read through that. Those are the updates and bug fixes. And since we're installing this on a Raspberry Pi, we're going to want to make sure to click the Pi image zip. And that's going to download a zip folder. We're going to save that. That'll take a few minutes to download. And while that's downloading, we are going to go to Balena Etcher. That is balena.io. You can always search Balena Etcher in Google. And we're going to want to download this as well. I already have it downloaded, so I'm not going to do that again. And this program will essentially let you burn the FPP image to your SD card. Our next step is we want to actually insert the SD card into our computer. So once you download Balena Etcher, you're going to have to install it as well, get that done, and then next step is going to be insert your SD card into your computer and then open up Balena Etcher. And so we have it open here, so we're going to click on Flash from File. And I have my FPP images here. Once you download the zip from GitHub, you are going to have to unzip it on most computers. You can click on it, then right click, and then extract all. It'll ask you where you want to extract it to, and that only takes a minute. But once you have it extracted, you can click on the 6.1.py, the folder that just extracted to, and here's our image here. So we are going to open that. So now we have our image here that we're going to burn. Now we want to select a target. So we're going to select this 32 gigabyte SD card here, and then we are going to click flash. And next thing you know, it is working. This will take a few minutes, so I suggest just walk away for 10 minutes and come back to it, and it should be done. If it's not, give it another 5 minutes, or keep waiting until it is done. So at this point, we aren't going to be driving any pixels directly right now. We're just going to go through the basic setup. So we're actually going to power the Pi itself. You can power the Pi just as long as you are not driving any pixels, but just if you drive pixels, make sure that you use this port or else you're going to cause some issues. So we're going to plug this in. We're going to let it get booting up. First boot may take a few minutes, so just be patient. You should see some stuff start coming on the OLED once it gets through the boot process. And that's kind of where we're at now, so let's keep going. So at this point, we got our M4 assembled onto the Pi, we got our SD card in it, and we're ready to power it up. For this, we're just going to actually power the Pi directly just for setup. We aren't going to power any pixels. If we were, we would want to make sure to use the onboard power on the M4 itself. And in a few minutes, we're going to see the OLED come on here. It should give us an IP address, probably something close to 192.168.8.1. But if you're using the actual onboard network, the hardwired network on the Pi, you're probably going to see something different and can actually skip this next step. So what we're going to do next is we're actually going to get connected to the Wi-Fi access point that FPP is putting out. We want to use our phone or a computer with Wi-Fi and look for an access point called FPP. You're going to want to find that, click on it. It'll probably prompt you for a password. The password is going to be Christmas with a capital C. Once you're connected to that, you need to hop into your browser. Okay, so here we are back in our browser where we connected to the FPP network, and the IP address on our M4-Pi was 192.168.8.1. So we pretty much just mirrored that, and it brought us to this initial setup page. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put in a host name. Host description is optional. You can put that in if you want. Share stats. Most of this is pretty self-explanatory. The one thing that we need to do is we need to enable a UI password or disable it, and then we also need to set an OS password. So right now we're going to leave this disabled. If you want a password to be able to get into FPP, you can set that through the UI password. For the OS password, we're going to leave that as the default Falcon. And once we're done with that, we can click Finish Setup. Okay, so now we are in the main FPP status page, and we have a red banner telling us that our SD card has unused space. So we're going to go to the storage settings link here, and we are going to grow the file system. And essentially what that's going to do is it's going to grow it out to use the entire space of your SD card. And so that runs pretty darn quick. We're going to close that. So now that we got that done, we're actually going to ignore this reboot warning for just another minute. And we're going to go to the status control tab, and we want to click on network. And in here, you're going to have two different interfaces if you're on a Raspberry Pi. If you're on a Raspberry Pi Zero, you're probably just going to have the WLAN 0. But if you're on a Raspberry Pi 3 or higher, you're going to get ETH 0 and WLAN 0. And so we're going to want to click on the WLAN 0. This is where we would put in our network information. So I'm going to put mine in real quick, and if you hover over it, it'll actually pick up the Wi-Fi names in the area. So we're going to click on that. I'm going to put in my password for it. And if you want to run your FPP or your M4 in complete standalone mode, you can just skip the SSID and the password for your Wi-Fi. At any point, if it doesn't have internet connection, it's going to put out that FPP access point, which you can always go to by typing in 192.168.8.1 into a browser. So now that we have our password and Wi-Fi name in here, we're going to click Update Interface, and then at this point, we're going to do the reboot. Now that our Microcyb M4 is rebooting, we're going to give that a few minutes, and on the OLED display, we're going to see the IP address once it connects to our network that our network assigns to it. If it does not, if it goes back to the 192.168.8.1, then something probably messed up in the connection between it and the network. So you're going to want to find that FPP access point again, connect to that. Remember the password's Christmas if it wasn't saved. Type in 192.168.8.1 and go through that network setup again, making sure you got the right password. Okay, so it looks like we are all rebooted here. And the IP address it gave me was 192.168.1.94. However, for yours, that could definitely be different. It probably will be different. You're going to want to look at the OLED display IP address to go to. Just type that IP address into your browser and you should connect to it, just as long as you are on the same network that you told it to connect to. At this point, we're kind of up and running. So the one thing that we can go to is the input-output setup. And by default, the M4 is going to be capped at 50 pixels per string. So this is where the FPP license comes into play. And if we read this warning here, the EEPROM's not signed, be limited to 50 pixels per output, and smart receiver support is disabled. So if we click on this CAPE info page, it's going to bring us here where it's the information about the CAPE that we have. We have our Microcyb M4. And we're going to want to click on EEPROM signature here. And to purchase a key, here's a link here to go to shop.falconplayer.com. And here are the keys. We're going to want to get this 8 output key. We're add that to our cart. It's $10. Go ahead and check out with that. And then once you go under my account, you can click on license keys and see all the keys that you've purchased. I'm not going to go there right now because I don't want to show mine. Okay, so once you have your license key, you're going to want to put in your order number here and then the license key here. You're going to click Sign EEPROM, and it's going to do a quick API call out to Falcon. Goes pretty quick. It's asking us to reboot again. Close. We will do a quick reboot. Okay, we're all rebooted here. Okay, so now that we have our EEPROM signed, we can go back to input outputs, and that message should have gone away now, as it did. And now we can actually assign however many pixels we want per port. So on this first port, I have 200 pixels, 80 pixels, 50 pixels. Once you get those put in, let's put 100 here. If you notice the start channel actually is yellowed out, it's showing that it's actually mirroring 1 right now. So a quick little trick is if you go to the port before, hit F2 on your keyboard, it'll auto assign 1 plus the end channel of the previous port. So at this point we can hit save. It's going to tell us to restart FPPD. We're going to do that. And we should be able to get some lights going now. So if we go under display testing and we can enable test mode here. And at this point you should have lights on ports that have pixels assigned to them. If you want to test per port, you can come down here and actually pick the model name that you named your port. You can do specific channels, you can change the pattern, you can go to a solid color, kind of whatever you want to do right here. So at this point we have our basic configuration done. We got it hooked up to our network, we got lights going through test mode, and kind of the next step is to get the lights to dance to music. And the way to do that is with X lights. And if you're like, what is X lights? Well, it's pretty much the heart behind everything and getting the lights synced up to music. It's also going to do a lot of the configuration for your M4 or your light controller as well. And for more information on X-Lights, go to xlights.org. I'll have that listed down in the description, or there's a ton of other resources out there. I'll put a couple down in the description as well for you to check out. So here we are in xlights.org, and just real quick, I can't cover everything in Xlights. We aren't spending that much time together today, unfortunately. We can download it here by going to the download page. If you're ever stuck or having issues, they have an awesome Zoom room that's pretty much open 24/7. And there's also a spot for resources here. A lot of information can be found here, Facebook groups, comparisons for controllers, Megatree calculators, all that kind of great stuff. So we aren't going to go over all this today, but we're going to get into X-Lights real quick, get the M4 assigned, and get this controller dancing to some music quick. Okay, so now that you have X-Lights open, if this is your first time, it's going to ask you to set a show directory. Pretty much that's a folder that everything about your show is going to be stored within. So I suggest just naming it X-Lights or something like that. I wouldn't put a date on it. So once you have your directory set, the first thing that you're going to be brought up to is the controller tab. And if you don't have a controller, you can go straight into layout, but since we have a controller here, the M4 is going to be considered an Ethernet controller, so we're going to click Add Ethernet, and it adds a controller here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to rename it over on the right side here, and we're going to name this FPP-M4-Pi, and description's optional. You can name it, you can add a description if you know it's like left side of garage or stairs or roof controller or something like that. Under vendor, we are going to want to look for Microcyb and click on that. And then under model, we are going to select the M4. It gives a unique ID right out of the gate. Usually you aren't going to have to change this. It's going to auto assign to be unique. And most of this other stuff is actually going to be pretty good as well. The one thing that we need to do here is we need to put in the IP address of our controller. So mine is 192.168.1.194. And we're going to leave it in DDP mode. Really, there's no good reason to go away from DDP if you're doing a simple light show with the M4. There might be some other reasons, but for today's sake, leave it in DDP. So we're going to click Save here. So now that we have our controller assigned, we'll notice that we have this little green light down here. That means that it's actually connected because our controller's on and connected to the network, and X-Lights is actually seeing it. So the next thing we want to do is build our layout. I have one ready to go. This isn't going to be a how to build a layout tutorial, but I have a couple stars, arches, a couple of verticals here, and a sphere. And I have a matrix. Since we have our props here, we haven't assigned them to a controller or anything yet, or they might be assigned to a controller and we want to change that. We're going to come back to the controllers tab, and we're going to find our M4-Pi here. And down here in the bottom right, you'll see Visualize. You're going to click on Visualize, and here are our models. If you aren't seeing them because they're assigned to another controller, you might want to uncheck this. With that unchecked, we can see all of our models. And let's say we want our arches to go on port 1 of the M4. And we're going to put our single lines on port 2, and we're actually going to stack them one after another. And then let's do our sphere on port 3. And we'll do a couple stars here on port 4. Boom. So essentially we have our arches all lined up on port 1, we have our single lines on port 2, we have our sphere on port 3, and on port 4 we have our stars. So we're going to X out of this. So since we have all of our models assigned, we can see that this is now an M4 controller and it's on port 1. We can get into sequencing. So once again, this isn't going to be a tutorial on how to do a sequence. I have a quick demo sequence here, just to kind of run through some effects and make the lights go flash. Here's a quick example of what it will look like. It's not great, just really put together quick with a couple VU meters and get a virtual matrix going here. If you want to see how to do a virtual matrix with a Raspberry Pi, I'll have a link in the video description as well. Let's save our sequence quick. And now that we have it saved, we're going to want to go under Tools and then to FPP Connect. So once FPP Connect opens, essentially it's going to look for any Falcon Player instance on your network. It's going to show up, it's going to show you the controllers here. And currently we want to only upload to our M4-Pi. I have a couple of other FPP's instances run in my house right now. So let's just kind of go left to right. You're going to have a checkbox for which controllers you want to upload to. And then you get to pick a sequence type. In most cases, the V2 sparse will work. If this is a master controller or you're sending out to some like WLED or something that doesn't store the sequence, and this is the master, you're going to want to use V2. But since this is the only one that we have right now, we're going to use the V2 sparse. Under models, you can pretty much leave this as none. FPP by default will actually auto-create pixel overlay models. Media, if there's a song song with the sequence, this would also upload the song. If you look down here, this is the media for this sequence here. UDP out, you can leave that as none. Playlist, don't worry about that. And then Pixel Cape, we want to make sure to pick M4-Pi. That will actually assign the ports under the M4 in the outputs tab instead of just the general outputs. So just make sure that you select the M4-Pi. And as we come down here, you're going to see the sequence name and the media. So this will look in your show directory. You can pick subdirectories, like if you have a folder just for sequences in here, you can select that. Or by default, it'll just be a recursive search through all your show folders. So once you have your sequence selected, you have your controller, you're going to click the upload button. If you're uploading a lot of songs and a lot of sequences, this can take a few minutes. Since this one, it goes pretty quick. So at this point, we should be able to go back to our M4-Pi here. And if we go under status control, now we have a sequence here. So before we play this, we're actually going to go under input output setup and channel outputs. Make sure everything was set up just properly between X-Lights and FPP. So here are our models. We have our arches, we have our single line stacked. Notice that this one is on port 2 as well. We have our sphere, and then we have our 4 stars. So all that looks good. Go back to our status page, and at this point, I'm actually going to shut down the M4 and get it hooked into a controller box. Get this running real quick for a quick little demo. Okay, so we got our M4 mounted up. I got a power supply here. We got it all hooked up. These mounts, if you're using a CG1500, I have these mounts on Thingiverse. Feel free to grab them. I'll put a link down in the description for these as well. I also have a little speaker along with a USB sound blaster. The audio directly off the Pi isn't the best. Using a cheap little USB sound blaster can really make your audio a lot better. And it just goes into one of the USB ports directly on the Pi. So let's get this all hooked up, powered on. We'll connect some lights and do a really quick demo. So now that we're back in FPP, I had my sound blaster hooked up. So we want to get that configured real quick. Under status control, you're going to go to FPP settings, and under audio video, it's going to ask you for the audio output device. By default, it's going to go to the onboard audio. We want to click the Sound Blaster Play 3. We're going to have to do a quick reboot here. We'll do that. So now that we are rebooted, we're going to click on this little FPP logo here as a quick little shortcut back to the main status page. And let's give this sequence a shot quick. With any luck, we should see some lights going. They probably don't make much sense. They just have a bunch of bundle of lights together. They aren't hooked up to props or anything. But it looks like they're doing the right thing. As always, I hope this helped. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed the tutorial, please give me a thumbs up, like the video. Thanks for watching.